Well, time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with Florence Villeminot. Hi, Flo.
Hi, Grace.
So this week we're looking at something France is famous for, or rather infamous for, and that's its bulky bureaucracy. The country is often said to be a civil servant's paradise.
And France certainly does have legions of civil servants. It's our word du jour. We talk about them as les fonctionnaires. Now, this is definitely a word that you've heard of if you follow French news. It must be said that France's civil service is a hot-button issue. It really sparks heated debates, especially between the left and the right, mainly over its size, its cost, and its effectiveness. And there's a lot of fascination in the public's imagination around France's fonctionnaires. And it must be said there's a lot of fonctionnaire bashing, and there pretty much always has been, as you'll see in this footage.
Trop bien payés pour le travail qu'ils ont.
Soit il y a un manque de personnel évident, ou alors les gens ils foutent rien derrière les bureaux pour qu'il y ait des queues comme ça partout.
Je me marierai certainement pas avec un fonctionnaire, je disais. Parce qu'ils se croient toujours plus haut que les autres, et puis, je sais pas, mal poli surtout.
Moi j'ai ma femme qui est, elle, fonctionnaire, qui travaille dans un centre social et qui fait hôtesse. Alors, je vois très bien que c'est pas du tout son boulot parce qu'elle ne sait pas accueillir, elle ne sait rien faire. Hein. Donc vous voyez, pour moi, le fonctionnariat, c'est le bazar, quoi. Je vous dis, bon,
On prend n'importe qui, même votre femme, si tu comprends bien.
Voilà, exactement.
So people venting their frustration back in the day. But what is the situation actually like? Well, these days there are over 5.5 million civil servants in France. We're going to take a look at the exact number. You can see 5.67 million. So that's about 20% of the workforce, or in other words, 1 in 5 workers are on the state's payroll. Now, that might seem like a lot, but France is actually not the European civil service champion. It's actually outshined by Nordic countries.
All right, so there are a lot of them, but what exactly is a fonctionnaire? Is it a catch-all status that applies to a lot of different people?
Absolutely. Public administration is divided into 3 categories. You've got state employees, so police, teachers, etc. You've got local authority employees, so trash collectors, gardeners, school cooks, etc. And then you have hospital employees. They're all in these very different sectors of les fonctionnaires. So fonctionnaires are essentially people who keep the country running. They keep the country safe, they keep the population healthy and educated, and it's for that reason that they're granted a special status.
Well, you say special status, but civil servants are known to have a reputation for having it quite easy compared to other workers. Is being a fonctionnaire really as cushy as its reputation is made out to be?
Well, the stereotype goes that fonctionnaires are underworked and overpaid, and also they're on sick leave all the time, and that is, of course, an exaggeration, but it's true that they do get a lot of perks compared to people who work in the private sector. For instance, they're pretty much guaranteed a job for life. It's really hard to get fired if you are a fonctionnaire. And on top of job security, they tend to work fewer hours a week than people in the private sector. They tend to retire earlier, and their pensions tend to be larger because they're actually not calculated the same way as the pensions are calculated for people who work in the private sector. Now, civil servants, however, say they deserve these perks, though some will admit that they can get away with not working as hard as people in the private sector.
Nous tous, fonctionnaires, on a passé un concours de la fonction publique. C'est aussi pour la garantie de l'emploi qu'on l'a passé. C'est aussi pour cette garantie de l'emploi qu'on accepte des conditions de travail difficiles et une rémunération souvent moins importante que dans le secteur privé.
Certains se cachent derrière la sécurité de l'emploi, alors que si ils faisaient le travail qu'ils font là dans le privé, ça fait longtemps qu'ils auraient été licenciés.
Now, being a civil servant doesn't only come with perks, it must be said. And in recent years, the civil service has been struggling to employ people, particularly teachers and people in hospitals.
Well, the debate on the plethora of the civil servants is something that comes up again and again. That's because France's bulky civil service costs a lot of money.
It certainly does. Keep in mind that the state pays for the salaries of current fonctionnaires and also the pensions of all the former fonctionnaires, and it adds up really quickly. It costs about 350 billion euros, about 12% of GDP, and of course, the big thing that we're talking about in France these days is the deficit, the budget deficit, which is over 5% of GDP. And so governments have been trying to find ways to tighten the belt, and often fonctionnaires come up in their crosshairs. And it must be said, successive governments have vowed to slash the number of fonctionnaires, for instance, by not systematically replacing those who retire or by hiring contractual workers. But the problem is, which ones do you get rid of? Are you going to get rid of teachers, of hospital workers, of police officers? They're already stretched thin.
Well, it can seem quite paradoxical then, because people are saying that there are too many fonctionnaires, but then they're also very attached to France's high quality of public service.
They certainly are, and that's perhaps a French trait, is to love to complain, but also love your fonctionnaire, because French people do have a certain amount of respect for their civil servants because they're working for the greater good. They want to ensure that the French public service is good quality, whether that's healthcare or education or even diplomacy. They want to make sure that these services are accessible to all, that they're relatively free or completely free. But France being French people love to complain, especially when their fonctionnaires go on strike, because that's another stereotype about les fonctionnaires, is that they're on strike all the time. Though here again, there is some understanding from the public.
Non, mais ils sont pas tout le temps en grève.
Chacun revendique ses droits comme il l'entend. Ils ont le droit de faire grève, c'est un droit qui leur est acquis.
Il y a des grèves de cantine permanentes, mais il faut aussi s'interroger sur les raisons pour lesquelles le personnel fait grève.
So successive governments have vowed to slash the number of fonctionnaires, but a real question is, can France function with fewer fonctionnaires? Because the population keeps growing, we keep getting older, and so arguably we actually need more fonctionnaires, not fewer.
Right, so it's set to stay a hot topic for a little while then. Thank you for that, Flo. That's all we have time for. But do be sure to check out other episodes of French Connections on our website, france24.com.